Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
You don't forget the first time someone laughs at your heartbreak, not a chuckle of discomfort or nervousness, but a full-on, belly-deep laugh, the kind meant to humiliate, not soften the blow. That was Marlene. My Aunt Marlene, my mother's sister, always the loudest one in the room, always the first to offer unsolicited advice, and the last to offer any actual support. She had this way of turning everything you shared with her into a cautionary tale for someone else. I should have seen it coming. Honestly, I should have known the minute I walked into that backyard on that sticky Sunday afternoon, that the moment she saw me standing alone without Tom, she'd use it as an excuse to open her mouth like a gaping wound. She didn't even wait for the second round of iced tea to get passed around before she said it. Right there, in front of my cousins, my uncles, my mother, and half the neighbors, she grinned and said, well, look who finally figured out what we all already knew. We told you he'd leave, didn't we? Then she laughed, big, dramatic, theatrical, as if my marriage crumbling was the punchline to some long-running family sitcom, and she'd just nailed the final joke of the season. No one said a word. My mother looked down at her plate like she'd suddenly remembered she had a coleslaw emergency. My cousin Beth, who had once confided in me about her own husband's infidelity, avoided eye contact like I'd started bleeding in public. And Uncle Dave, Marlene's husband, chuckled weakly, the kind of forced sound people make when they don't know which side of a line they're supposed to stand on. I stood there, holding my paper plate with half a deviled egg and a sweating plastic fork, and I realized something deeper than just embarrassment. I realized they didn't just expect me to suffer quietly. They enjoyed watching it happen. You'd think I'd be used to Marlene by now. This wasn't her first performance. She'd been cutting me down for years, always under the guise of concern, always with that backhanded sweetness she wrapped her poison in like sugar on a razor blade. When I first started dating Tom, she told me, "Be careful, sweetheart. Men like that don't usually stick around for girls like you." When we got engaged, she said, "I'm surprised he proposed so soon. Maybe he's rushing into it before he really gets to know you." At our wedding, she cornered my mother in the kitchen and whispered loud enough for half the house to hear, "I give it 3 years before he's bored stiff." It lasted 6. And every time, I bit my tongue. I nodded. I smiled politely. I told myself she was just old-fashioned, just jealous, just bitter, just bored. I excused her because that's what we were raised to do with difficult women in the family, pretend they were lovable, pretend they meant well, pretend they weren't picking us apart piece by piece just to feel bigger in their own skin. But something shifted in me that day at the barbecue. I don't know if it was the way she laughed or the way everyone else just looked away like my pain was a minor inconvenience during their afternoon potato salad. Maybe it was the way my mother cleared her throat and said, "Well, marriage is hard for everyone, dear," like I hadn't just been gutted by betrayal. Maybe it was the realization that this wasn't just a lack of support, it was something colder, something calculated, something that made them feel better about their own messy lives. I didn't say anything. I didn't scream. I didn't throw my drink in Marlene's smug face, even though I thought about it. I just stood there and smiled, but it wasn't the same kind of smile I used to wear around her. It was quieter, harder, sharper. Something inside me clicked into place, a different kind of resolve, one I hadn't felt in years. Later that night, after the guests started drifting out and the grill's smoke had settled into the evening air, I sat alone in my car and replayed every word of Marlene's laugh in my head. And that's when I remembered something. It was a passing comment Tom had made years ago, back when we were still pretending to be happy. We were talking about some business investment he was trying to swing, something sketchy I didn't fully understand, and I remember him saying, "Don't worry, I've got some help from an old family connection. Someone who knows how to move money quietly." I'd brushed it off at the time, chalked it up to some distant friend of his father's or one of his sketchy golf buddies with offshore advice. But now, that phrase, old family connection, echoed a little differently. I thought about Marlene, about Uncle Dave's smug little chuckle, about how quick he was to change the subject whenever money came up. I thought about how Tom always seemed so damn confident in his financial safety net, even when things between us were falling apart. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel broken. I felt curious. Grief has a strange expiration date when you're a woman people think they've figured out. You're allowed to cry, but only for a short time. Then you're expected to wear your dignity like a pressed blouse and keep your voice soft while the world quietly pats your shoulder and waits for you to shut up and move on. But I wasn't in the mood to move on. I wasn't even in the mood to cry anymore. Something colder had taken over, something sharper, cleaner, like ice replacing all the soft, aching parts of me that had been worn down by months of betrayal, abandonment, and humiliation served with a smile. So I did what no one expected. I started digging. Not emotionally, not through old texts or love letters or whatever people think you're supposed to wallow in after a divorce. I started digging through paperwork, through joint account statements, through dusty folders shoved in the back of the office closet, through old email printouts and tax returns I had never really looked at before. At first, it felt stupid, like I was just chasing shadows, trying to distract myself from the hurt. But then I saw it, something strange. A string of payments labeled consulting fees, regular amounts, always the same, tucked neatly between legitimate bills and mortgage payments. I didn't remember ever discussing consulting services with Tom. I didn't remember him ever mentioning hiring anyone under that vague title. But what really caught my eye wasn't the payments themselves, it was the initials next to the wire transfer information. D.W. Uncle Dave. At first, I thought maybe I was seeing what I wanted to see. Maybe I was so desperate for this mess to make some kind of sense that I was inventing patterns that weren't really there. But I kept digging, and the deeper I went, the less coincidental it all looked. The payments weren't one-off transactions, they were systematic, regular, clean. Always just under the threshold that triggered automatic scrutiny, always labeled in ways that sounded legitimate if you didn't look too closely. But I was looking closely now, and what I saw was starting to twist something in my gut that had nothing to do with heartbreak and everything to do with fury. You ever had someone mock your pain like it was entertainment? Ever had your heartbreak turned into gossip by the very people who should have hugged you, who should have sat beside you in silence and helped you breathe through the wreckage? Tell me I'm not the only one who's watched their family sip wine while dissecting your collapse like it was a side dish at dinner. That kind of pain does something to you. It teaches you to sharpen your silence into a blade and wait. Not for sympathy. Not for healing. For a damn opportunity. And this, right here, felt like one. I didn't go to my family with what I found. I didn't pick up the phone and start shouting accusations. I didn't even mention it to my closest friend. I took it all, every printout, every bank statement, every flagged transaction, and I walked it straight into the office of someone I hadn't spoken to since the early days of my separation. His name was Carter, and he wasn't just a divorce attorney. He was the kind of man who looked quiet, but fought like hell when something smelled off. He didn't talk much, didn't sell himself with flashy business cards or leather chairs. But he listened. And when I laid out everything I had found, he didn't dismiss a single detail. He leaned back in his chair, tapped a pen against his notepad, and said something that stuck in my head long after I left his office. "Julie," he said, calm and serious, "this isn't just divorce debris. This could be fraud. And not the amateur kind either. If what you're seeing is real, and I think it is, we're dealing with something a hell of a lot bigger than a messy breakup." I nodded, still calm, but underneath my skin was a fire I hadn't felt in years. I gave him everything, every document, every file, even a USB drive with scanned records. He promised to dig deeper, to do it quietly, to keep it under wraps until we had something solid. And I trusted him, not because he promised justice, but because he never once looked at me like a broken woman chasing ghosts. He looked at me like someone who finally woke up. 3 days later, my phone rang. I answered before the second ring. Carter's voice was steady, clipped, and far more serious than usual. "You're gonna want to hear this in person," he said. And just like that, I knew the game had officially begun. I walked into Carter's office with a strange sense of calm wrapped tightly around me, the kind of numb stillness you feel before a storm breaks loose, where everything is too quiet, too steady, like the world knows something's about to split wide open. I had spent the night before staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation I'd ever had with Tom, every snide remark from Marlene, every lingering glance from Uncle Dave at the family dinners when money was mentioned and suddenly the conversation changed direction. I hadn't pieced it all together yet, but something in my gut told me this wasn't just about a failed marriage anymore. This was about something bigger, something rotten beneath the surface of everything I thought was stable. Carter didn't waste time with pleasantries or small talk. The moment I sat down across from his desk, he opened a thick file folder, flipped it around so it faced me, and pointed to a set of bank statements marked with red ink. "I've spent the last 48 hours combing through everything you gave me," he said, his voice low and even, "and what I've found isn't just questionable, it's criminal." I leaned in, eyes narrowing as I followed his finger across the pages. There were numbers, account names, timestamps, even digital transfers labeled with vague descriptions like operational consulting and market facilitation. But what chilled me wasn't the money, it was the trail. The accounts weren't just connected to Tom's name. They were interwoven with Uncle Dave's in a way that didn't look accidental or casual. This wasn't a one-time favor or an old loan someone forgot to report. This was structure. This was intentional. And this was deep. They've been moving money between personal and business accounts using overlapping shell entities, Carter explained, flipping to another page. Your ex-husband's company doesn't just have outside investors, it has silent partners, and one of them is your Uncle Dave. The kicker? He's listed on some of the documentation as an operations advisor, which allows him to funnel money into the business under the radar. But the real problem, he added, tapping the folder again, is that they've been avoiding taxes in the process. This isn't just a dirty side deal, it's financial laundering. And the IRS will rip them apart for it if they catch wind. I sat there, blinking slowly, letting it all settle into place like puzzle pieces I hadn't realized were missing. So that's why Tom always seemed so confident, even when our finances were bleeding. That's why he never panicked about shortfalls or audits or bank calls. He had a backdoor lined with stolen cash and a partner who had decades of experience hiding it behind legitimate smiles and family gatherings. And I bet not a single person in the backyard that day had a clue what Uncle Dave was really up to, not even Marlene, who was probably too busy clinking wine glasses and handing out unsolicited marital advice to notice her own husband was knee-deep in fraud. "Do you think she knows?" I asked quietly, my voice barely louder than a whisper. Carter shook his head. "Not likely," he said. "She's either completely in the dark, or she's so used to looking the other way that she's stopped asking questions entirely. Either way, she's not the kind of woman you need to worry about legally, but she is the kind you should be ready to watch unravel when the truth comes out." I sat back in the chair, my mind running faster than my pulse, thoughts colliding with each other as new angles, new implications started surfacing. This wasn't just about what they'd done, it was about what I could do next. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't the one reacting, I was the one holding the playbook. And I wasn't interested in just surviving anymore. I wanted to tear down everything they thought they'd built on my silence. Carter closed the folder slowly, folded his hands across the top, and looked me straight in the eye. "You've got two options," he said calmly. "You can press charges now, make this loud and messy, force the system to handle it, and let the fallout burn fast. Or you let me work this quietly, let me build it airtight, piece by piece, until it's too late for them to wiggle out. Either way, Julie, this isn't just divorce anymore. This is fraud." I didn't answer right away. I just sat there, staring at the closed folder, thinking about how many times I'd swallowed my pride, bit my tongue, let people walk away from the damage they caused without consequence. And then I thought about Marlene's smug little smirk, about the way she laughed when she thought I was the one losing everything. I looked up at Carter and smiled, calm, measured, deadly steady. "Let's do it quietly," I said. "Let's make it surgical. Some things don't need to be shouted to be heard, and revenge doesn't always come in the form of screaming matches or broken dishes. It comes in silence, in subtle glances, in well-timed moments that make people question the very ground beneath their feet." That's why I didn't storm into that family dinner with paperwork in my purse and fire in my voice. That's why I didn't drag Marlene across the table by her pearl necklace or throw Uncle Dave's shady bank transfers in the mashed potatoes. No, I wanted it clean, calculated, and quiet. Because the louder someone's ego, the sharper it hurts when the rug slips out from under them without a sound. It was a typical Sunday evening at Marlene's house, the kind of gathering where everything looks perfect on the surface, cloth napkins folded like swans, candles flickering in crystal holders, a roast sitting in the center of the table like some trophy from a life she pretends is spotless. She greeted me with that fake warmth she always uses when she's in front of an audience, hugging me just long enough to feel performative, but not long enough to mean anything. The house smelled like rosemary and deceit, and I took my seat at the table with a smile so calm it must have unsettled her more than if I'd shown up crying. She wasted no time. Before the salad bowls had even made it halfway around the table, she leaned in and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "So, Julie, have you started looking for a real man yet? Or are you still stuck in the pity phase?" She laughed at her own joke like she always did, eyes scanning the room to see who else would join in. A few polite chuckles followed from the usual suspects, cousins too spineless to challenge her, relatives who preferred to stay neutral even if it meant watching someone bleed. I just smiled. Not the tight, polite smile I used to give, but a relaxed, almost bored expression, like I'd already heard the joke before she opened her mouth. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I just picked up my wine glass and took a slow sip, letting the silence do the talking for me. Because I knew what she didn't. I knew what was coming. Carter had been working quietly, exactly as promised, building a trail so tight not even Dave's best lies could wiggle through it. Over the last week, he'd pulled financial records, Shell Corporation documentation, and digital footprints that connected every wire transfer to a timeline that screamed premeditated fraud. He'd even found a few offshore accounts buried so deep it took specialized software to trace them. And now, Carter had filed preliminary disclosure paperwork with federal investigators, not to blow it wide open just yet, but enough to make some people start sweating. Earlier that day, Carter texted me, "Ready when you are. Countdown starts on your signal." So I gave it. 5 minutes into dinner, my phone buzzed quietly in my lap. "Check your aunt's phone in 5. I glanced at Marlene and waited, counting down slowly in my head between bites of roasted carrots and dry conversation. The tension in my stomach wasn't nerves, it was anticipation, sharp and electric, the kind that hums beneath your skin when you know a secret no one else in the room is ready to hear. Then it happened. Marlene's phone buzzed loudly on the table, breaking the rhythm of dinner like a slap across porcelain. She glanced at the screen and hesitated. Her smug expression flickered, just for a second, replaced by something confused, something uneasy. She answered it on speaker, her usual habit, because she liked everyone to hear who was calling, liked being the center of attention even during a conversation that wasn't theirs to hear. But this time it backfired. "Hello," she said brightly, still trying to hold the room. Dave's voice came through the speaker in a low, panicked tone, his words rapid and shaken. "Marlene, I need you to listen carefully. I'm at Carter's office. I don't know how he got the documents, but I've been named in a federal audit. My name is showing up on Tom's financial statements. This isn't a misunderstanding. We've got a serious problem." The room went absolutely silent. Forks paused midair. Wine glasses hovered without sipping. Even the kids at the side table stopped arguing about dessert and stared. Marlene's face changed color so fast I thought she might faint. Every ounce of blood drained from her skin until she looked like a ghost in a floral blouse. Her eyes darted toward me in that slow, creeping way people do when they start connecting dots they never expected to find. I met her gaze, still smiling, still calm. I didn't say a word. I didn't gloat. I didn't even raise an eyebrow. I just lifted my wine glass again and took another sip, slow and deliberate, like nothing at all had happened. But something had happened. A silent bomb had gone off in the middle of her perfect dinner party, and the smoke hadn't even begun to clear. There's a certain speed at which truth travels once it's been let out of the cage, never as slow as the people who built their lives on lies would hope, but always fast enough to catch them while their guard is still down. After that dinner, it didn't take long for the cracks in Marlene's carefully curated reality to start spreading like a hairline fracture in glass that's finally been tapped in the right spot. The days that followed were strangely quiet on the surface, but beneath the silence was a tension that hummed like a wire ready to snap. Dave had gone dark, no calls, no explanations, no smug little jokes. Marlene stopped texting her usual passive-aggressive group messages about her garden or the dinner party she wanted to host next month. It was like someone had pulled the sound from her world, and I watched from a distance, knowing exactly what was happening behind the scenes. Carter had been methodically tightening the noose, confirming every detail, verifying every transaction, assembling the final report that outlined just how long Dave had been hiding assets and how deeply he'd woven himself into Tom's financial chaos. It turned out this wasn't some recent partnership or a one-time favor. It had been going on for years. Dave had created a series of shadow accounts, slowly feeding money through consulting contracts and false partnerships, shielding income, dodging taxes, and stacking silent investments under other people's names. And Tom, of course, had been more than happy to play along as long as the money kept flowing and no one asked too many questions. When Carter showed me the final stack of documentation, neatly organized in a folder thicker than a Bible, I didn't feel shock. I felt clarity. It was like someone had handed me a blueprint of my own betrayal, only this time, I wasn't the victim in the margins. I was holding the pen, and I finally understood the full picture. Everything made sense now. The late nights, the strange business trips, the way Tom always seemed oddly confident about our finances, even when I knew something didn't add up. He hadn't been saving us, he'd been laundering us. And Dave had been standing in the shadows the entire time, smiling at family dinners and carving holes in our lives from the inside. But the confrontation wasn't about Dave. Not yet. That part would come later, handled in a courtroom or maybe a federal office with Carter sitting at the head of the table. No, this next move was for Marlene. She was the one who had taken my pain and turned it into a party joke. She was the one who laughed while I was bleeding. And now, she was going to get her silence shattered, too, but I wasn't going to scream. I didn't need to. Truth, when handed correctly, speaks louder than rage ever could. I called her mid-morning on a Wednesday, a time I knew she'd be home, in her favorite armchair with her second cup of coffee, probably planning her next dinner menu or polishing her goddamn silverware. When she picked up, her voice was cautious, but still trying to sound composed. "Julie," she said, as if my name had suddenly become a question instead of a fact. "I'd like to drop something off," I said plainly. "I'll only need a few minutes." There was a pause, then a nervous little laugh. "Of course, dear. Come by." When I arrived, she met me at the door with that brittle smile she wore like a mask made of sugar. I didn't bother with pleasantries. I walked straight to her dining room table, pulled the folder from my bag, and laid it down without saying a word. Her eyes followed my hands, then flicked to the documents inside as I opened the cover and slid the contents toward her. "These are copies of everything your husband's been doing behind your back," I said quietly, clearly. "Fraud, money laundering, tax evasion, funding my ex-husband's business through illegal channels and hiding it under false identities. Your name's not on anything, but your life is about to be." She didn't say a word. Her lips parted slightly, her fingers trembling just a little as she touched the edge of one of the statements, eyes scanning numbers she didn't understand, but instinctively knew were damning. I leaned in just enough so only she could hear me. "Next time you want to laugh at someone's marriage falling apart," I said, my voice low and calm, "make sure your own isn't rotting under the floorboards." Her face cracked then, not with tears, not with rage, but with that hollow kind of fear that comes when someone realizes the story they've been telling about their life no longer holds up under pressure. I picked up my bag, turned to leave, but paused at the door for just one more truth, just one final cut. "Oh, and by the way," I said, without even looking back, Tom wasn't the only one cheating. I didn't stay to watch her reaction, but I knew she heard me, and I knew it hit her where it hurt most. There's something deeply satisfying about walking away without slamming the door, about leaving behind the wreckage you didn't cause, but made damn sure someone finally had to answer for. I didn't need to stick around and watch Marlene unravel or see Dave trying to untangle years of lies he once thought were cleverly disguised behind signatures and shell accounts. I didn't need to hear their excuses, their frantic explanations, their desperate attempts to rewrite the story now that their version had been ripped apart by paper trails and legal filings. That kind of spectacle, the aftershocks of a truth that's been held in silence for too long, wasn't meant for me to witness. It wasn't about the noise. It never was. Justice, when it's done right, isn't loud. It's surgical, precise, clean, and irreversible. I drove away that day with the windows down, letting the wind clear the last of their voices from my mind, letting the air finally feel like mine again. The road stretched out ahead like a clean slate, long and unbothered by everything I had left behind. There were no dramatic exits, no flaming bridges, no fiery speeches. Just quiet closure and the kind of peace that only comes when you finally stop trying to make broken people see your worth. Marlene would wake up the next few mornings wondering how much of her life had been real and how much of it was just a curated performance to distract herself from the fact that her marriage had been hollow for longer than she'd ever admit out loud. She would scramble to piece together some version of events that didn't make her look like a fool, maybe try to spin it like she'd always suspected something, maybe even try to play the victim if it meant keeping the sympathy she once weaponized against me. But it wouldn't matter. The documents were real. The investigations were in motion. And every smug word she'd ever thrown at me now rang with a bitter echo she couldn't swallow down. Dave, meanwhile, would be spending his days not on the golf course or sitting smug at the head of the table during family holidays, but hunched over in some attorney's office, explaining how offshore funds and illegal transfers managed to creep into his clean-cut suburban image. The IRS didn't care how well your lawn was trimmed or how many charity dinners your wife hosted. They cared about the numbers. They cared about the signatures. And they cared about the trail Carter handed them with the precision of a man who knows exactly where to hit so it hurts the most without making a mess. And Tom, well, I stopped thinking about Tom the moment I realized he'd never been the storm. He was just the wind that knocked the shutters loose on a house that was already falling apart. He would get what was coming too, in time, but I didn't need to sit around to see it. I'd already gotten what I came for, not revenge, but something far rarer. I got clarity. I got the truth to land where it needed to. And I got myself back from the version of me they'd all tried to bury under their expectations and their judgments. The best part is, they'll spend years trying to figure out how I did it, how the quiet one, the one they pitted and mocked and dismissed, managed to blow apart everything they thought was untouchable without ever raising her voice. They'll talk in hushed tones at future dinners, speculate in grocery store aisles, whisper theories to each other when no one else is listening. But they'll never really know. Because some people think power is volume, but I've learned it's precision. It's timing. It's knowing exactly when to speak and exactly when to stay silent until silence becomes the sharpest blade in the drawer. I don't know if they'll ever truly understand what they did to me, not just the betrayal, not just the mocking, but the years of dismissing my pain like it was some minor inconvenience in their otherwise perfect little narrative. I don't even know if I want them to understand. Because understanding would require introspection, and I don't think people like them have ever sat with themselves long enough to hear the echo of their own cruelty. But I do know this, mocking someone's pain doesn't age well. Eventually, the things people say in arrogance come back like echoes in empty rooms, and sometimes, the woman you laughed at becomes the one holding the pen that signs the end of your charade. And some people forget that even quiet women carry sharp knives. Not the kind you wave around in anger, but the kind you keep hidden until the right moment, the kind that doesn't spill blood, but severs illusions with surgical precision. She thought I lost everything. But the truth is, I was just getting started.